What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. On today's episode, we are going to cover St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, which is the Catholic Cathedral of the Archdiocese of New York. So we're going to go check out the church, and then we'll come back after to talk about it in detail. All right, so hope you guys enjoyed the footage of St. Patrick's. One kind of programming note that I wanted to discuss before diving into the details of St. Patrick's is I've gotten some feedback on recent videos, and I kind of wanted to just adjust slightly the format or structure of the videos, if you will. So I think this episode is going to be kind of like a good example of what it'll be going forward. But basically what I'm going to do is just at the very start of the episodes, I'm going to do just like a very short intro to just mention, what church we're looking at, where it's located, and maybe just something quick like the denomination it belongs to or something like that. And then immediately going to move into all of the footage that I have of it. Just going to put it all kind of in there at once. And then I'm going to come back after that and then discuss everything in detail. And what I'm going to try to do going forward is include timestamps. So, if you want to pop in and just go straight to the footage of the church, or if you wanted to go to kind of more of the discussion portion, you'll know exactly where that's at. And it should hopefully be an easier way to kind of like navigate through the videos and find that stuff. Because I've kind of played around with some different ways of structuring videos, but this is, I think, going to work well, and this is going to be the model that I use going forward. So hopefully now, you can know exactly what to expect, and hopefully those, the timestamps, if you will, and things like that will kind of make it easier to navigate and get, exactly out of the videos, whatever you want to get out. If that's jumping into a particular spot, watching the footage or the feedback, or whatever about the church that you want to go to. So just wanted to kind of plug that right at the beginning. All right, so now to discuss kind of the details of St. Patrick's. I had a very fun time getting to cover this video on the channel. This is one of those that is almost a little overwhelming, just in the church's importance and the scale, the physical scale of how big the space is, and then just this church, out of all of the, I'm trying to think, but out of all the churches that we've covered so far, I think this has got to be the most visited. I saw a stat somewhere that said more than 5 million people visit this church every single year. So, that's pretty substantial. And you can definitely tell in the videos that there's a lot of people there. So this church is it's in Midtown Manhattan, and it's on Fifth Avenue. So it's in just such a busy area, just both for tourists and just general pedestrian foot traffic. So it's literally right across the street from Rockefeller Center, the famous Atlas statue. And so because of that, there's just always going to be kind of people flowing in and out of it, of course, outside of the typical parishioners that go on the typical, schedule for mass and other events and things like that. So I like to when I'm physically in these spaces, I like when they're more empty, because I can just get whatever footage without having people in the way or whatever. It just wasn't possible because there were people everywhere. So I did my best with it. But St. Patrick, and what's funny enough, it's funny that this is not only the first or the second, this is actually the third St. Patrick's Cathedral that we're covering on the channel, because we looked at St. Patrick's Cathedral in Charlotte, and then Old St. Patrick's last week, and now the current St. Patrick's Cathedral. And some of the history is kind of obviously interrelated with Old St. Patrick's, and some of this kind of already discussed, but the Diocese of New York was established early in the 19th century, and as the population in New York greatly kind of continued to expand, that's why the old St. Patrick's Cathedral was built to alleviate kind of the existing churches that just weren't big enough to kind of fulfill what the diocese, the newly found diocese, needed the church to, all the services it needed to fulfill. And then I think it was in 1850, the archdiocese, it was elevated from a diocese to an archdiocese. And then, as we discussed last week, around this time is kind of when, because of population constraints, you have similar issues as the original old, St. Patrick's had. And so this current St. Patrick's Cathedral was, conceived and designed, and it was started construction in 1858, and it kind of had a long construction process. It did, I think, in the 1860s. It delayed construction a little bit during the American Civil War, and then it was finally finished in 1878, so a couple decades there from when it was initially started, and officially dedicated in 1879. And I mean, if you just the space is so huge, like it's almost, like I said, it's just overwhelming. So I mean, the grand scale of the project in general just kind of, I think, makes sense when you think about it from that perspective. And like literally, I mentioned this is on Fifth Avenue. Literally, the church covers an entire city block, like from one end, and then basically the back of. It's actually further back from the main sanctuary, or where the altar's at now, because there's a separate chapel at the very, very back. So literally from the entrance in the narthex all the way to the back is an entire city block. So it's huge, and I think you get that perspective. Or I tried to at least show that perspective some in the footage, because I had to do like wide angle, like that fish like angle lens to be able to get to be able to really just like show everything, because the scale of it is almost just so dramatic. So this is a space, like, again, because it is visited by so many tourists. Like, I recommend anybody that's in that very popular area of New York City to go. Because I think there's just so much to see and kind of take in. I love, so just like entering immediately, obviously you're taken back by just the scale of everything. Even before you enter, just the two towers, the spires on either side of the entrance that, they are bell towers, but just the scale of it alone when you're standing under it, it just, again, this is that Gothic architecture style. It just pulls your eye upward. And, on the tops of like all these towers, there's just like things that look like so ornately sculpted. And even over the entrance, the main entrance, it's got like those dramatic arches. There's just so much for your eye to look at. So obviously, like when you first enter, I think the first thing is it's just the scale of it is kind of what hits you. And there's dozens of those columns or pillars that just like definitely elevate the space. And that's, the design of them is that it just like, it keeps your eye going up, giving the illusion that they kind of go on forever or transcend to the heavens, or however you want to say it. But I think that definitely, that effect is well pulled off and very impressive. I really liked seeing the mural that's right over the entrance doors. Again, there were people everywhere. But it's huge. I mean, it stretches over basically like that entire like back entry wall. And it's very impressive. So I enjoyed getting to see that. And then on either side of, I mean, it really extends the whole way back, but especially on either side of the nave, there's all those sub chapels, and shrines. And I think there's like 12 of them in total, and enjoy getting to see some of those. There's so much, just like the mosaic work might have been like my favorite part of it. There's that one section featuring a saint where there's just like all this like the gold mosaics, and then it kind of like makes a landscape. The artistry of that, I think, is just absolutely amazing. And there's other of those side chapels that feature the mosaics as well. So like there's so much to see that it's worth just going, just to kind of be able to do like, just take your time, and like if you explore just around it and kind of do a lap around the church, you get to kind of see all those different iterations. And again, I mean, the scale of it's huge. So by the time you get to the transepts are actually so big that they have massive entryways in their own right. I don't think I mentioned this yet, but the bronze doors are kind of famous in their own right. They're very old, like to the main entrance, the bronze doors, each one weighs like several tons, I think. And they are open a lot of the time because so visitors can kind of come in and out, but just something to, look at the main entrance. They're huge. And again, like either end of the transept also has entryways, because just like, again, that's the scale, the scale of this church, which I think is really cool. The main altar, I think the high altar that I read was actually the original one was replaced in like the 1940s. And so the current one has been existing since then. It's obviously, cool when those like very important sacred centerpieces of churches don't have to get replaced and can kind of transcend all the time. But the current one being there, I think since, the early 1940s, I think is still pretty cool. And then, as I mentioned, at the very back of the church, there is a, its own sub chapel where there's certain like smaller kind of like events and ceremonies and things. And the church does request that there's no footage or, video or photos taken of that. So I certainly respected it. But that's like at the very, very back. And yes, I mean, there's just a lot to see. There's famously crypts underneath this church that a lot of the the archbishops of the Archdiocese of New York are buried there. So I feel like this cathedral kind of has it all. It's got just like, it's got the scale, it's got just the beautiful design and architecture on the outside with all those dramatic, towers and spires, and then inside just the stained glass is like, I don't know the number, but there's just an unbelievable amount of stained glass in there. And again, I think that because of the architectural style being set up the way that it is, there's so much to keep your eye like busy, and again, to keep you looking upward and giving that kind of illusion that I think the vaulted ceilings and those pillars just kind of like allow you to see. There's also Stations of the Cross. I noticed them. They're probably all over, but I noticed them in particular in the transept, and they're just those like beautifully sculpted, all those images and scenes. And I think seeing that, it's worth seeing those as well. And just all the marble, the bright marble and everything. It's just a beautiful cathedral. And seeing all, like there's wooden pews, but you see there's so many of them. In the footage, you might tell that there's actually screens now installed on a lot of the pillars, just because that it's so big, depending on where you're sitting, your view might be blocked. So that stuff like that had to be installed, which I think that just speaks to the, not only the size, but the significance of the church because of how many people worship there, which is awesome. So yeah, I mean, I think, this cathedral really has it all, and it's historic. I think like something like the famous like rose window over the entrance, going in to be able to see that. I love that. Over the pipe organ is massive in this church too. It's almost hard to comprehend that scale. But just there's always something to look at and see in this church, and I've been to it a few times, and I think it's worth visiting every time I go to New York or in that area, just because it's just awesome. There also is on the back end of the church, on the other side of the block, there is the Archbishop's residence. You can kind of see it in like the very, very last video clip that I have in there. I really enjoyed getting to see this church. And again, I think it's cool that, obviously this is an old cathedral now, but when you add in the history with Old St. Patrick's, and you kind of look at just the start of, the diocese, and then the Archdiocese of New York and the Catholic Church, and kind of how that history has expanded. I think adding all that stuff in makes learning and seeing, both of these cathedrals really just not only worthwhile, but I think it's definitely like, it's just such an important part of the local history. So I think that's really, really cool. And there's been some renovations and things like that, and I'm sure that kind of will continue. But I think that they've done a really good job of honoring the history, but then also kind of like keeping the space up to date for the needs of, the staff, the diocese, and then like the worshipers and everything like that as well. So hope you guys enjoyed getting to see this cathedral. I really enjoyed getting to see it. I think it's fascinating. I think it's beautiful. I think the scale of it is incredible. And just all of that is evidenced in just how frequently visited this church is. And I think that's I think that's very cool to see. So thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back with another episode soon. And until then, keep looking up.